Harold Davis never imagined that a random knock on his farmhouse door would unravel everything he held dear. His days were simple, rising at dawn to milk the cows, kneeling down to coax seeds into the stubborn Georgia soil, and finding a certain peace in the slow, steady rhythm of country life. But beneath that peaceful surface lurked a quiet menace. Two police officers determined to squeeze every last cent from anyone too powerless to resist. Harold was certain he could handle the intimidation on his own until it became clear that these men weren't just bullies. They were about to take everything he had. Little did they know Harold had an ace up his sleeve, a son who worked for the FBI. Harold Davis was 76 years old, but his mind and spirit felt far younger. Many described him as a fixture of Orchard County, a patch of rural Georgia best known for its rolling peanut fields and rows of peach trees that stretched toward the horizon. His family had farmed this land for 3 generations, and Harold took enormous pride in preserving that legacy. Early every morning, when the sun's first rays broke over the sloping fields, Harold would be out there, wearing his faded overalls, an old baseball cap shielding his warm brown eyes from the sun. The sweet smell of the wet earth accompanied him as he went from row to row, checking his crops and humming gospel tunes under his breath. Unlike many modern farms, Harold's was not sprawling. He kept a modest 25 acres, tilled carefully and with great devotion. The barn, painted a fresh coat of red every few years, stood like a sentinel near the main road, its rafters holding stories of Harold's father and grandfather before him. The farmhouse itself was small, 1-story and sturdy, with a wide wraparound porch and a sagging wooden swing that squeaked just enough to remind you it was still there. In the living room hung a row of family photographs, his late wife, Evelyn, always smiling from under a straw sun hat, their son, Alan, in a crisp suit on the day of his graduation from the FBI Academy, and a much older photograph of Harold's parents standing in front of the land they first bought after decades of sharecropping. This land, this house, and these pictures were everything Harold had. Each was a testament to resilience and history, struggles and triumphs that knit together over generations. One late afternoon, as Harold raked stray clumps of hay near the barn, he heard the low growl of a vehicle on the gravel road. A police cruiser appeared at the bend, its headlights off, but a swirl of dust following in its wake. 2 officers, one tall and burly, the other wiry and restless, stepped out. Their uniforms bore the Orchard County Sheriff's Department patches. Harold's heart gave a little jump. He couldn't recall doing anything wrong or ignoring any routine requirement. Still, he kept calm. In a small place like Orchard County, a police visit could mean anything or nothing. "Afternoon, sir," said the tall officer, whose name tag read Officer Larkin. He didn't remove his sunglasses even though the sun was setting. "Afternoon," Harold replied, setting aside his rake. The wiry officer, Officer Koenig, swung his baton lightly against his leg. "We've received reports of some possible zoning violations on your land," he said. "Mind if we have a look around?" Harold's brow knit in confusion. Zoning violations? On a family farm that hadn't changed much in 50 years? "Well, sure, you can have a look. Not sure what you'll find, though," Harold said. They followed him into the barn, Larkin moving slowly, Koenig picking up old feed sacks and squinting in corners as though suspecting some hidden contraband. Harold watched them, uneasy. Nothing about their manner felt like normal procedure. Koenig questioned him about livestock permits, while Larkin looked over every inch of the building. They took pictures, lots of them pausing to murmur to each other. When they finally emerged from the barn, the sun had dipped behind a distant stand of pines. Harold had never been so aware of his own breathing. "We'll have to file a full report," Larkin said, tucking a small notebook into his shirt pocket. "We're seeing multiple potential issues: chemical storage, structural stability, possibly the well water system." Harold, baffled, shook his head. Chemical storage. I don't use any chemicals, my farm's mostly organic, and my well's tested every year by the county extension office. Koenig shrugged, a false note of pity in his grin. Well, you know how it is. Regulations change all the time. If you want to get ahead of any formal charges, you might think of cooperating with us. Might make some problems go away. Harold felt his gut twist. He didn't appreciate the tone nor the subtle threat, but as an older black farmer in a county that had not always been fair, he knew better than to argue right then and there. I see, he managed. I'll do what I can to remedy any issues. We'll be in touch, Larkin said, turning on his heel to head back to the cruiser. Harold watched the taillights vanish into the twilight. He tried to shake off the encounter as a misunderstanding, convinced himself that these new officers were simply overzealous. But as the sun vanished, he couldn't chase away the lingering tightness in his chest. The days rolled on, and Orchard County's September gave way to a warm, dusty October. Harold went back to his normal routines, feeding the chickens, tending his squash fields, heading into town twice a week for supplies. Yet he felt an undercurrent of anxiety. The officer's warning replayed in his mind, making him second-guess even the simplest tasks. Had he built the compost bin too close to the property line? Did his barn's roof need updated ventilation? One crisp morning, he drove into town, the cracked windshield of his decades-old pickup framing the pastel clapboard storefronts of downtown. He parked outside Sanders Hardware, where Maribel Sanders' father had once employed Harold's father. Maribel was in her 60s now, with iron-grey hair, and ran the store with a no-nonsense but friendly approach. "Mr. Davis," she greeted, wearing a thick flannel to ward off the chilly morning air. "Haven't seen you in a spell. Everything all right?" Harold forced a smile. "Doing well, Miss Maribel. I was hoping to check on the cost of new water pipes. Heard they changed the code for well connections." She frowned. "Not that I've heard, but let me ask around. If you're worried about that, though, I'd be happy to get you a discount if there's a real need." Harold nodded his thanks, but as he paid for a small bag of nails, his senses prickled. Outside the front window, he glimpsed a patrol car easing by Koenig behind the wheel. Their eyes met for a split second. A chill shot down Harold's spine. Was Koenig following him? That afternoon, Koenig and Larkin arrived at the farm unannounced. This time, they demanded he open the storage shed where he kept gardening supplies. "Sir," said Larkin with forced politeness, "we received a tip that you might be storing unsafe fertilizers or pesticides back here." Harold tensed. "A tip? From who?" Koenig grinned. "We can't share that, but we do have enough reason to check it out." Inside the shed, they poked at every bag of seed and turned over every box of gardening tools. Harold explained that he used organic compost and only the mildest, soapy mixtures for pest control. He didn't think it mattered. They took more pictures, scribbled more notes, and then Koenig cleared his throat. "You're racking up quite a list, Mr. Davis. Improper storage of materials, questionable barn structure, maybe even a safety hazard for livestock. If we report this all, you could face fines or forced closure. But," he added, "there are ways to settle things quietly." Harold's voice went dry. "How do you mean, quietly?" Larkin didn't mince words. "We'd advise a consultation fee. Let's call it $1,000 for now. You give us that, we won't file all these reports with the county. Maybe we can let you slide as long as you cooperate." Even as Harold's heart pounded, he felt a deep anger rising. But he was alone, Evelyn gone for years, and Alan living in a high-rise apartment in Washington, D.C. "I don't keep that much on hand," he hedged, unwilling to open his wallet so quickly. Koenig shrugged as if unconcerned. "Then we'll have to do what we have to do." They left Harold standing in front of his own property, more bewildered than ever. His farm, his inheritance, his whole world was suddenly subject to the whims of these two officers who appeared to think they were unstoppable. It didn't end with that. Over the next week, Harold found himself pulled over twice. The first time, Larkin insisted Harold's license plate was obscured by mud. The second time, Koenig alleged Harold had run a stop sign on an empty country road. Neither charge stuck, but each encounter had the same undertone: pay up or we'll ruin you. Desperate to make it all stop, Harold scrounged together $1,000 from his savings, the money he'd put aside to fix the barn roof. He shoved it into a brown envelope. When Koenig and Larkin arrived yet again, smug expressions already plastered on their faces, Harold handed it over with trembling hands. "You fellas take this," he muttered, "and leave me be." Koenig counted the bills, smirked, and slid them into his jacket pocket. "We'll consider this a friendly understanding, Mr. Davis. Just remember, we might be back if we find new problems." They were. 4 days later, they claimed Harold needed to install an emergency sprinkler system in the barn, an outlandish, extremely expensive demand for a small operation like his. They named a fresh price: $2,000. For the first time, Harold objected loudly. "That barn stood for 60 years without an issue," he insisted. "I have standard fire extinguishers inside, and that's always been enough." But Koenig's glare hardened. "You can argue with us, or you can pay. Guess which option keeps your farm intact?" Harold felt pinned by their threats. It was like watching a slow tornado tear through his life. The second envelope of money swallowed what remained of his short-term savings. Now, not only was the barn roof repair on hold, but the seed money for next season's harvest was gone. Late one evening, after rummaging through old ledgers to see how he could possibly afford the next round of demands, Harold picked up the phone and dialed his son. He'd done his best to hide these troubles from Alan, a dedicated FBI agent working on financial crimes in Washington. Harold felt an odd sense of shame, like he was admitting he couldn't handle the burdens of his own farm. On the fourth ring, Alan's weary voice answered, "Dad, everything okay?" Harold's throat constricted. For a moment, he was tempted to hang up and pretend this was a wrong number, but he drew a breath and forced the words out. "Son," he said, "something's been going on. We have a pair of local officers here, Larkin and Koenig, trying to shake me down. They claim I'm violating codes that I never even heard of. They keep coming by, demanding money." Alan's line went silent, but Harold heard him exhale sharply. "How long has this been happening?" "Couple weeks now," Harold confessed. "I already gave them 3,000 total. They want more." "You should have called me the moment this started, Dad." Alan sounded both concerned and angry. "What they're doing is flat-out extortion, not to mention intimidation. I deal with criminals like this every day, except these two have badges they're abusing." Harold's voice was hushed, as though the walls might overhear. "I was afraid you'd think I couldn't handle my own problems. Besides, they've got the power here in Orchard County. I'm the FBI, Dad. That badge trumps their local nonsense. But I need you to be safe, first and foremost. Don't pay them another cent if you can avoid it. I'll make some calls, see what resources are available." For the next hour, father and son spoke in hushed tones. Alan asked countless questions about the tactics the officers used, the money demanded, and any paper trail that might exist. Harold felt a bit of relief in simply telling someone. Even so, he worried that bringing the FBI into this might incite more retaliation. 2 days passed with no sign of Larkin or Koenig, and Harold wondered if Alan's behind-the-scenes efforts had done something. He tried to focus on the harvest, culling the final summer crops before Georgia's mild autumn set in. Old Mr. Coleman from a few farms down came by one afternoon to see if Harold needed an extra pair of hands. "You look tired," the white-haired neighbor said, patting Harold's shoulder. "Heard some rumors about the law pestering folks round here. You holding up?" Harold considered telling him, but hesitated. In small towns, rumors traveled quickly, and local police sometimes had long memories for grudges. He simply nodded. "I'm getting by." That night, as Harold sat on the porch with a mug of tea, the phone rang again. It was Alan. "Dad, I pulled a few strings," Alan said, excitement tempered by caution. "My boss authorized a preliminary inquiry. We can't storm in without cause, but we do have enough to send a discreet observer, and we'll set up a trap if these guys are as brazen as you say." Harold's heart hammered. "A trap? You want me to goad them into coming here again? I don't like it either, but these men have to be caught in the act. You have the right to record them on your property, or if you can get them to talk on the phone about money, that might help, but we'll try to keep you safe." "Just tell me what you need me to do," Harold said softly. By the time he hung up, an odd mixture of dread and hope filled him. Part of him wanted to pack up and leave the farm until everything blew over, but that was impossible. This was his home, his family's heritage. Another part of him was furious enough to stand firm, no matter the price. A week of tense silence ended when Harold least expected it. An overcast afternoon found him mending fence posts along the western boundary of his property. He was so busy hammering nails that he didn't notice the patrol car until it was almost upon him. Larkin stepped out, Koenig behind him. Their expressions were stone cold. "Heard you might be making calls to some fancy law enforcement," Koenig sneered. "Gotta wonder who you think you are, stirring up trouble." Harold felt his stomach drop. Could they already know about Alan's plan? "I've spoken to a few people, yes," he said, trying to keep his voice from quavering. "I need clarity on these so-called violations." "You're about to need more than clarity," Larkin snapped. He reached out and snatched Harold's hammer from his hand, tossing it aside. "You've lied to us. You said you didn't have more money, yet we hear you might be holding back." Harold's breath caught. He'd never felt so cornered. He had no idea if the hidden recording devices Alan had sent were capturing everything as planned. He hoped so. "I gave you everything I had," he said. "My barn roof is still leaking because of you. My accounts are nearly empty." Koenig crossed his arms. "Well, let's say we do a thorough search. This time, I've got a tip you're hiding stolen tools, or maybe some contraband in your barn." Harold bristled. "Contraband? This is a family farm. We don't do anything illegal here." With that, Koenig tried to shove past Harold, but Harold, fueled by weeks of anger and fear, stood in his way. "You're not going in there unless you've got a proper warrant." For an instant, Koenig and Larkin looked genuinely startled. Perhaps they expected Harold would continue to fold under intimidation. Koenig's face contorted. "We are the law here," he hissed, and he reached for Harold's shirt collar. That was the moment the black SUV rolled up, quiet but steady. Alan Davis emerged, dressed in a sharp suit, an FBI windbreaker folded over his arm. Beside him stood two fellow agents, their expressions as resolute as Alan's. "Hands off my father," Alan barked, and the authority in his tone stopped Koenig's hand mid-motion. Larkin stepped back, confusion flickering on his face. Alan held up his badge. "FBI. We've been monitoring your activities for weeks." Chaos erupted. Koenig tried to bluster. "We have probable cause here. Outside parties have no right," but Alan shut him down. "You've got no warrant, no legitimate complaint, and we have recorded proof you've taken bribes, threatened a civilian, and concocted fake violations." One of Alan's fellow agents, an imposing woman named Agent Ramirez, announced loudly, "Officers Larkin and Koenig, place your hands on the vehicle." Larkin, voice trembling with anger, spat. "This is a setup." "Sure is," Alan replied coldly. "A setup to catch you red-handed in your corruption." Harold stepped aside as the FBI agents cuffed both men, reading them their rights. A swirl of relief and disbelief rushed through him. It seemed impossible that these two tormentors, who had loomed so large in his nightmares, could be subdued so quickly. When Larkin and Koenig were led away, Harold noticed a group of neighbors gathered along the main road. Word traveled fast in Orchard County. Several folks he knew Miss Maribel from the hardware store, Mr. Coleman, A few farmhands from down the road were watching in stunned silence. He heard a ripple of murmurs. "They're arresting the cops. Those two had it coming." "I always knew something was off about them." Alan gently clapped a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, are you hurt? They didn't rough you up too much?" Harold exhaled, feeling an ache in his chest that was half relief and half exhaustion. I'm all right. Shaken, but all right." Agent Ramirez nodded. "We'll need a full statement." "We've also uncovered a paper trail indicating these two have been extorting multiple farm owners, store owners, most of them black or immigrants. This is bigger than we thought." Harold's jaw tightened. All the anger, shame, and helplessness of the last weeks welled up, but in that moment he felt a surge of pride for his son. "I knew the good guys would come through," he said softly, voice quivering with emotion. In the days following the arrests, Orchard County found itself thrust under a spotlight. Local news crews arrived, microphones in hand, eager to interview Harold. They filmed him walking among his fields, describing his ordeal in soft, measured tones. Larkin and Koenig's extortion ring, once hidden by threats and confusion, came tumbling into the open. Shopkeepers, restaurant owners, and farmers came forward with their own stories, fines that made no sense, fees for expired permits, forced payments under the guise of safety consultations. Alan's FBI office established a temporary station in the county courthouse to handle the wave of statements. Each new testimony sparked fresh outrage. The local police department's chief, an elderly man with a penchant for fishing trips, abruptly resigned. County officials promised sweeping reforms, a new internal affairs unit, a more transparent complaint system, and a town hall forum for residents to air grievances without fear of retaliation. Harold found himself an unlikely symbol of courage. One afternoon, he had an emotional meeting with a family who ran a small Filipino grocery in town. They admitted that Larkin and Koenig had threatened to deport them if they didn't pay. Harold shook his head in sorrow. "Nobody, especially not in this county, should live under fear," he said. "But I learned we can't fight it alone. It took me too long to call for help, and that's something I regret." The sense of unity that blossomed in Orchard County felt unfamiliar, but long overdue. Volunteers arrived at Harold's farm to repair some of the damage Larkin and Koenig had caused. Young farmhands replaced rotted fence posts, hammered in fresh roof shingles for the barn, and reorganized the disheveled storage shed. Miss Maribel personally donated a new set of metal storage cabinets, ensuring Harold's supplies would never again be left vulnerable to sabotage. Alan, too, stuck around longer than he'd originally planned. His supervisors allowed him leeway to oversee the legal process, and to ensure his father and everyone else got the support they needed. A few weeks later, autumn brought a slight chill to the Georgia air. Rows of pumpkins in Harold's field glowed a warm orange, and a gentle rustle of wind hinted that winter would eventually come. But for now, the farm bustled with renewed life. Families visited to pick pumpkins, children giggling under the wide southern sky. The porch swing that once squeaked in emptiness now swayed with friendly chatter. Harold felt a weight lifted from his soul. While he had lost a decent sum of money to the extortion, the community had pitched in. Some neighbors refused payment for the repairs. Others brought covered dishes, macaroni casserole, fried chicken, peach cobbler, turning weekends into impromptu gatherings. One Saturday evening, Alan and Harold found themselves seated at the old kitchen table, discussing the future. Alan stirred sugar into a mug of herbal tea. "Dad, I can't stop thinking about how quickly those two men singled you out. It wasn't random. They targeted you because they thought you had no backup. And they preyed on your pride, knowing you might not want to reach out for help." Harold sighed, setting down his own mug. "I should have called you from the start. I guess part of me believed that if I kept my head down, I could weather the storm." Alan took his father's calloused hand. "You've weathered plenty of storms, but sometimes we all need a little help." From the kitchen window, they could see the barn lights glowing softly. The sound of insects rose from the fields, mixing with the gentle hush of a late autumn breeze. Harold thought about Evelyn, his wife, and how proud she'd be to see their son in that FBI suit, taking care of the town. "You did good, son," he said. "Better than I deserved." "You deserve every bit of justice, Dad," Alan said. The county scheduled an open forum at the refurbished high school auditorium. Alan stood quietly in the back, near a bleached wooden stage, while Harold sat among the townspeople. The lights buzzed overhead, giving everything a slightly surreal glow. A county commissioner, newly appointed, tried to set a tone of reconciliation. "We want everyone to know we're committed to righting these wrongs," she said. "We recognize that citizens lost trust in the local department. We're implementing background checks, mandatory body cameras, and zero tolerance for misconduct." Dozens came forward to the microphone. They described years of intimidation and fear. Some were small business owners who had risked bankruptcy to pay off Koenig and Larkin. Others were ordinary citizens, racially profiled and stopped repeatedly on their drives home. Even the local mayor admitted he had overlooked reports that should have raised alarms. Toward the end, Harold was called to speak. He rose, walked to the podium, and removed his hat. His voice was calm but resonant. "I was born and raised here. My father toiled on this land as a sharecropper before scraping together enough to buy our first few acres. I've always known Orchard County to be a place of hard-working folks. But what I went through these past weeks was something that felt like stepping back into a darker time. The room grew still. Eyes focused on him, from young mothers bouncing infants on their laps to older men with ball caps pulled low. I want to say this as clear as I can," he continued. "When a community stands together against injustice, change happens. I thank the FBI for coming to my aid, but we should never have let these men run unchecked. There are real good officers in our county, decent people, but we can't sweep bad ones under the rug. We owe it to ourselves and to our children to do better." Alan, watching from the back, felt a surge of pride. He remembered being a teenager in that very auditorium, listening to pep rallies and dreaming of a future that might take him far from Orchard County. Yet here he was, back home, and he'd never felt more certain that this was where he was meant to be right now. Weeks passed. The sense of crisis faded, replaced by the slow rhythms of rural life. The orchard trees had lost their leaves, standing bare beneath the broad winter sky. Harold rose before dawn to feed the chickens and check the greenhouse. Alan, sleeping in the guest bedroom, would wake a bit later, then join his father for coffee. One such morning, Harold finished tidying the kitchen and found Alan checking his phone, brow furrowed. "Just got word," Alan said. "Larkin and Koenig took a plea deal to avoid a protracted trial. They're each facing up to 15 years. There's talk of them revealing other officers involved in similar schemes." Harold sighed, relief tempered by sadness. "I hope it sends a message. No one should go through what this county went through. But I never wished them harm, only that they be stopped." Alan nodded. "They'll be held accountable, if not for you coming forward. Dad, it might have gone on for years." A gentle quiet settled over the kitchen. Outside, the early sun peeked over the fields, illuminating the frost that clung to the grass like tiny diamonds. Harold looked around the worn linoleum floor, the chipped paint on the windowsill, and realized he loved every imperfection. "You think you'll be heading back up to Washington soon?" Eventually, Alan said, "But I put in a request to be stationed in Atlanta. That way, I can visit more often. Might even help you around the farm, if you're open to it." Harold smiled, a sudden wave of emotion making his chest tighten. "I'd be more than open to it, son. By late winter, the orchard's branches were tipped with new buds, and the cycle of planting began again. Harold prepared the soil for early crops, while a crew of local volunteers helped him install a more modern irrigation system. The money for it came partly from a restitution fund that Koenig and Larkin were ordered to pay into once they pled guilty. One afternoon, as Harold watched the sprinklers cast arcs of water across the freshly tilled field, Alan joined him. "Dad, I just heard from Miss Maribel," he said, referring to the hardware store owner. "She wants to host a community rebuild day at our farm, like a symbolic event showing we're moving forward together." Harold chuckled, warmth blooming in his heart. "If you'd told me a few months ago that I'd be some kind of local figure for unity, I'd have laughed. But here we are. The day of the event dawned bright. Families arrived in pickups, bearing potluck dishes and toolboxes. Children dashed around the yard, squealing with delight when they spotted a cluster of newborn chicks near the coop. At a makeshift booth set up beneath a large oak tree, volunteers collected donations for a victims' relief fund, which would help anyone else extorted by the defunct ring of corrupt officers. Late in the afternoon, Harold found himself near the orchard's edge, scanning the crowd. He saw Miss Maribel chatting with young Miss Diaz, who had recently opened a flower shop and had also been harassed by Koenig. He spotted Mr. Coleman shaking hands with a Korean-American couple who had once run a struggling produce stand, now thriving thanks to new customers. All these people, once mere acquaintances, were connecting, bridging gaps of race, age, and culture. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Alan said, appearing at his side, seeing everyone come together. Harold slid an arm around his son's shoulders. "Better than anything I could have imagined." Spring finally arrived in Orchard County, the fields shimmering with young sprouts. Harold's routine became a mix of practical chores and moments of quiet reflection, savoring the future he almost lost. Law enforcement changes were in full swing. A newly appointed sheriff, a career deputy with a solid reputation, began an internal review. The FBI presence, though less visible now, had left behind a renewed sense of transparency. As Harold tended a row of tomato seedlings one afternoon, Alan strolled up. "Got some news, Dad," he said, pushing his sleeves up to help with the garden. "I've officially been transferred to the FBI's Atlanta field office. That means I'll be less than 2 hours away instead of 10. Maybe I can visit every other weekend, help you expand the orchard." Harold paused, blinking back tears he refused to let fall. He thought of how Evelyn would have loved to see Alan at the farm more often, bridging the gap between city ambitions and country heritage. "You have no idea how proud your mama and I are," he said quietly. "I might not have said it enough, but you never forgot where you came from." Alan tossed a shovel aside and embraced his father. For several moments, they stood in the quiet orchard, father and son, letting a soft wind wrap around them like a warm blanket. With each passing week, the threat once posed by Larkin and Koenig became a fading memory, though never forgotten. Harold took every opportunity to speak at local gatherings, urging neighbors to be vigilant, to watch out for one another, and to stand up to any signs of injustice. More than once, someone teased him about running for mayor, but Harold always laughed it off. Tending the land, staying close to the soil, this was where he belonged. The new irrigation system, powered partly by solar panels, cut down on labor. Harold found he could spare hours to do other things he'd long neglected. He repainted the farmhouse trim, meticulously fixed squeaky hinges, even reorganized the attic with boxes of old photographs and keepsakes. Alan helped, often rummaging through the attic with a sense of wonder. "Dad, I never saw these pictures of Grandpa," he exclaimed, holding up black and white snapshots of a young Harold with his own father, standing by a donkey cart. "Your grandpa's the one who taught me the importance of standing tall," Harold said, "but it was your mother who taught me to lean on others when I need to." Summer arrived, bringing orchard stands full of peaches and local sweet corn. Harold's farm bustled. A freshly painted sign at the entrance read Davis Family Farm, open for tours. The final legal hearings for Larkin and Koenig took place, with both men receiving substantial prison sentences. Victims across the county finally felt a sense of closure. At a small gathering in front of the courthouse steps, local officials publicly apologized to Harold and the other victims. The county commissioner shook Harold's hand. "You've shown us that it's not enough to sit by. When something's wrong, we all have to speak up." Harold took her words to heart. He gave a simple reply, "If we don't protect each other, who will?" That night, in the quiet of his porch, Harold rocked on an old chair, sipping sweet tea as twilight deepened. Alan had returned to his new home in Atlanta, but left behind a promise to visit soon. Every creak of the porch boards reminded Harold of simpler times, yet he felt no nostalgia for the days before all this happened, because now the town was changing in ways he once barely dared to imagine. He closed his eyes and listened to the cicadas in the distance, thinking about Evelyn, whose spirit lingered in every corner of that farmhouse. "We made it, Ev," he murmured. "We stood together, and that changed everything. Thank you for joining us on Harold's journey, a testament to courage, family, and the power of community." In a world where injustice sometimes lurks in plain sight, it only takes one person's stand to spark a larger movement. Harold's story shows us that even when you feel alone, there are helpers waiting in the wings, ready to shine a light on the truth. It reminds us that real strength comes from unity, neighbors coming together, loved ones stepping in, and each of us believing that we can make a difference. If Harold's resilience and Alan's unwavering support resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us bring you more inspiring stories of everyday heroes challenging the odds. Spread the word and stand with us in celebrating hope, justice, and the boundless power of community.